Okay, people that were in my last session on the more of the design aspect of it, you're going to see some duplication of slides in here. And all I'm going to try to do is to make people aware of sed basins. And John was telling me that we don't use a lot of sed basins in Hawaii. I'd like to encourage you to start thinking about using them for one very big reason. If you have a sed basin and your storm drain dumps into the sed basins, you will no longer need to put anything in front of the inlets. Let the sed basins do the work. But those sed basins to work have to be functional, which means maintenance. The other thing that has to be done is that designers, you have got to know what you're doing. You cannot just take a simple little 3,600 cubic feet per acre and call it good. There's a lot to it. Contractors, you have to do something that a lot of people don't want to do, but when it rains, you got water going into a set pond, you're going to have to do maintenance. Can't get out around it. And with that in mind, let's just start talking a little bit about this thing. This is what we use in Colorado. It's similar to what maybe you might use into here. You see all that wonderful sediment in front there. If you happen to have a bare field that water came to that pond, you might be lucky to capture 5 to 15% of the sediment in that runoff water. Most of it goes into the inlet when you have flood flow conditions. In this particular case, there's a failure occurring on there too. So these are high maintenance items that after every rainfall event, and by the way, please don't yank them out just because it's going to rain a little bit. Yank them out only when there's really going to be major flooding occurring. But if you're lucky, 5 to 10, maybe 15%. Compared to a well-designed silt fence, very small contributing area. If you look at the sidewalk here, clean as a whistle. That was not cleaned up. That was after the rainfall event. But if you look at it, you see there's a gap in there. Well, this is proper design. But not everybody has this luxury. And that's one particular pond for a very small area, and they captured over 90% of the sediment. There's only these type of structures that you should be thinking about doing if you really are serious about reducing sediment. This is where designers and reviewers, you got to get with contractors. Find out what the contractors are encountering, because these are the things that will be more effective than all the inlet barriers you can think of. So, on our sed basins and sed traps, the goal is to contain water long enough for this to settle out. And it may take you, depending on if you have any clay soils, which I think you have a little bit here in Hawaii occasionally, it's going to take at least 48 hours sometimes, maybe longer. Some cases, if it's real small particles, it will take months to settle out. Well, we got a practicality coming in here. So the designers make the ponds for this or this, and what do you do as a contractor to try to take a look at it? Well, let's take a construction site. Got this off the internet. Here's a wonderful pond over here. What is it doing? Probably the contractor thinks it's a real pain in the rear to have that water sitting there. But did you ever think of the fact that if we can make all the water flow into that pond, then all the sediment would be flowing into that pond? But that pond would have to be well designed, and then you as a contractor have got to maintain that pond. And that's the goal that you have in front of you. That means you're probably going to do something after every rainfall event, maybe even before rainfall events, which means December, you probably have a lot of chances to play with it in here in Honolulu. but July is probably not that much because you don't have as much rainfall. But questions you ask yourself as a contractor: can I capture all the water coming to me? Could I put in diversion ditches that forces the water in there? That's the maintenance things that we're looking at. And designers, did you put that information in there for the contractor to act on? Regulatory people, did you have the ability to let them do something besides what's on page 82 of the manual? So think out of the box is what I'm saying. Will it accommodate flood flows? We just finished one last half hour. Flood flows are important. Will it capture sediment? Depends on how well you have it designed. That is not the contractor's responsibility. That is the designer's responsibility. Are you retaining or detaining? The difference of these two, you got to know. Retain means you capture everything and nothing leaves with a pipe at all, except by evaporation or seepage. Detaining means that the water comes in there and you're releasing it at historic rates. You're detaining it for a short time. Most ponds, if not all ponds, are detention facilities, which means if you're releasing water, you better make sure it's as clean as possible, which is a designer responsibility. You hear where I'm going back on here? Designer, designer, designer. They have to get out and see what's happening. Can the pond be part of the total site development? If that was a detention pond, why not make it into a set pond to begin with and then let the contractor maintain it on a temporary basis? Separate them or get them included each on it, whatever the case may be. Saw this last time. A couple things that we're looking on a set pond, just conceptual ideas. Need to accommodate inflows, need to detain water, need to discharge it at a controlled rate. I need to discharge it at a flood rate. My whole goal with these 4 items up here is to capture large particles and smaller particles. You as a contractor don't give a rat's about this. But boy, you better make sure you have those 4 things up there and maintaining those. That's the big one that you got to do. Is it an easy job? No. Can you always succeed to have clean water from your site? Absolutely not. You will never have clean water leave your site. Can you stop erosion? No. This has nothing to do with erosion, but if you erode things, you're going to get sediment. Can I remove all particles with a set pond? Only if you retain everything. But how big is that pond? So that's the type of questions in here. Designers got to work with contractors got to work with designers, you got to work with regulatory people, and of course you have the inspectors who are always your friends. You've got to work with them too. Okay, what needs to be maintained? What are some of the key things? That's what we're all here about. Well, first of all, when you see all these things, I want to talk about the one item that is ignored: flood discharges. And flood discharges are something that you've got to be aware of on a construction site, because you occasionally get something, and think you just had a little tiny rainstorm event a couple weeks ago around here in Honolulu, if I remember right. And when you start talking about these things, you're going to be talking about those two, there's inflow and outflows. In other words, as a contractor, expect the water to be coming onto your project in flood flow conditions. Then you start preparing, how do you take care of that? That's the first part. Second part is, after the flood flows over with, how do we take care of all that water that's sitting in the pond and drain it so we get rid of all the water down to bare ground? That's the second part. That's the most effective way. Well, I came across this particular little said pond. I love Google. You can see these things, get these little things on here. And when this, by the way, it looks like it's a roadway up into here. They dug this pond into here and put the riprap. And the question is, will flood flows discharge through there in a safe manner? Now, you're hoping the designer did the job right. But if you, as a contractor, who have a tremendous practical knowledge that us designers do not have, by the way, did you do the job right? So let's start taking a look at some of these things to see into here. First of all, that's the idealized world. I want water to come in, stays in here, discharges out to here. The only question is, how effective is it? You don't care about how effective it is because you are just maintaining it. But you hope that the designer did the job right. Well, if we look at this a little bit, you have to ask the questions. Was there a design? Or was this me as a contractor hacking it out because it looks like I've had this done before, I have no problems, I know what I'm doing. Be real careful on those things. What's the purpose of your pond? Is it to capture flood flows? Capture something there that comes because of just nuisance flows? What are we trying to capture? Rocks or clay soils? Well, that again goes back to your designer. Hear that common theme I'm saying? Designers got to get involved here. How did you evaluate, or who evaluated everything upstream to know that that's the right size? In other words, you cannot go out and say, yeah, that looks like about the right size pond to build, and just build it. You've got to put some thought into it. More importantly, you as a contractor, how are you going to maintain what you see into here? And of course, who approved it? Well, and of course, construction here. Oh yeah, and then we have the inspector of it, because you can always be sure somebody needs to inspect what you put in there. Well, let's see what really happened here. Take a good hard look at that whole thing, and I'm going to guide you over to certain spots. First spot is right over there. What you can't see in the back of the room is that there are gullies being formed right in there. So water's coming down and going right into that pond. Gee whiz, why didn't they stabilize it? Oh, wait a minute. What is that stuff there? Why is it in a pile there? There's your maintenance, folks. Oh yeah, we're going to get to it tomorrow. Well, when did you put it there? About 30 days ago? Well, why you wait until tomorrow before you did it? That's your job as contractor. Get the stuff in now. You got an erosion occurring. That means a lot of water's coming down here. Take care of it. Don't ignore it. That's probably the best advice I can give to everybody here. So no stabilization of the embankments for inflow waters. But we're not done yet. What about over here? If you look at this riprap, that looks like new riprap to me. Somebody was doing some maintenance, but they have a little itsy-bitsy problem coming in here because this would say that the water goes out right over here. Why did you let that happen, you as a contractor? Because I know most contractors have a very good knowledge about runoff and where water goes. So we got a problem there. So you're going to have ongoing erosion occurring here, ongoing erosion occurring here, and then you got your stabilization measure in a nice little pocket there that you better get it somewhere installed in the right manner. So when we look at this thing, what's going to happen with this? The water's going to come down, go through here, go through the pond, and discharge right out. You will probably capture rocks, maybe some sand, dead bodies, I don't know, but it's going to be something there that indeed is not going to be the desired goal of any regulatory agency. This is a contractor's responsibility that we're talking here, especially if there's just one that you developed yourself. So be real careful when you do these things. Well, that's to accommodate flood flows. What about detained? That's this little part right into here. Let's take a look at that. Now, one of the things that comes with a pond, if you make it nice and circular or make it a square, you might as well just simply open up the floodgates and let the water flow out because it ain't going to do anything unless you put baffles or put some flocculent or something in it. You want it long and relatively narrow, but you got to be careful. Too narrow can make it worse. So that's where your designer comes back in here again. So do we have sufficient volume up there? Well, that volume is long flow path length. That's your key word there, designers. Construction, that's your key word. Make sure you've got a long path of water flow here. This was, by the way, a highway project in Idaho that they did. Sufficient width. If you notice, long, narrow. Matter of fact, we like to talk about the length to the width ratio of at least 3 to 1. You'll see many, many plans that are 2 to 1. Get away from 2 to 1. Go to 3 to 1, designers. It works a lot better. But you as a contractor, when you build this thing, if it said that you're supposed to have that be 12 foot wide and you say, well, I'll make it 6 foot wide, all you're doing is creating problems for yourself. So be sure you do the job right when you see it. Make sure you got it depth. We recommend that you at least 30 inches. But that can vary according to what you have coming into it. Let's take a look at our pond. This is idealized, not idealized, this is actually put in Idaho. I don't know where this is, but take a look at this shape versus that shape. Take a look at the flow length, take a look at the flow width. Almost about the same, aren't they? This pond will only capture large diameter particles. And as a contractor, if you put that in without consulting, you're making something that's not going to be that treatable. It looks good for show and tell, for somebody who doesn't know. You need to have something like that as much as you can. That takes land, there's no question about it. And of course, every highway project has lots of land to put a big pond in there, right? In many ways, just think about some of those. You have medians and highways, that's a long, narrow strip. You might want to think about that. Just a thought here. Okay, discharges. Make sure, contractors, that water has a way to leave that pond. You want water to leave, because remember, this is a detention pond, not a retention pond. Look down into this one down below here, and by the way, you want to drain this thing so it gets down to bare ground. That's the goal on all these things. But there's absolutely no way to discharge that water stored back there. Well, ironically, now, if that is a retention pond, that is the most effective pond in the world. Only trouble is, it has a limited volume, doesn't it? And if it rains again with that water in there, what's going to happen? It's going to shove all the particles downstream. So you have to weigh yourself here and say, how do I get rid of this water? How do I get rid of this water? That's all part of working together with regulatory designers and contractors together. This is a project we were called in on. It's kind of an interesting one. Take the top one. All the water from the construction that was going in comes in through that pipe. All the water that comes into this pond goes out over here. Now here we got this aiming this direction, here we got that going that way. If you look at this, that's a screened metal plate with a gap down at the bottom. Now where's most of the sediment and waters that comes into a pond? It's at the bottom. So what was leaving that site predominantly? Lots and lots of sediment. Oh, it captured some sediment here. Well, how was it this way? Contractor put the screen upside down. It was supposed to be the other way around. Whose fault's that? Not the designer, not the regulatory agency. That was the contractor. So know those plans well. This whole thing came in there, and this is a rock burrito right into here. They're trying to capture, and they did. They captured some sediment. But I figure for every cubic foot of sediment that came in there, probably was 10 to 20 cubic feet that left. It was worthless, totally worthless. Compared to this one. This one in turn is very good. And by the way, the outlet structure is the most important part. When you look at anything on a sed pond, look at the outlet structure. That is the most critical part. Flood flow is important, but the critical part is make sure water drains. That's a skimmer will drain. And in both cases, there should be an overflow. Well, most ponds cover that. But always as you look to it there, be aware. Outlet structures, there's a whole bunch of them. We saw this in the last session. Gabions, perforated riser pipes, and skimmers. That's not so good. That's a little bit better, but this is the best. And they're reusable. If you have rock barriers, you can't see it in there, but there's a rock barrier in there of just small rock, 1 to 2 inch diameter rock. You're gonna need to rake it to make sure that things don't clog up that rock. The wire here was because we had straw mulch. We didn't want it to go into the unit itself. You may need to make your own barrier. And by the way, don't think that these do anything here for filtering out any sediment. You need smaller rock. So, riser pipes. Ironically, riser pipes work pretty good as long as there's no water in the pond. Because you end up taking the water down at the bottom of the pond, not at the top. That's where the least amount, this is where most sediment is. So you better have a gravel wrapped around it. Was the right size pipe? This is you as a contractor should be looking at it. Did you use perforated pipe? You as a contractor need to look at it. Did you put rock here that's 1 to 2 inch in diameter, not 5 to 6 inch diameter? That's you as a contractor need to look at it. Is the height correct? The answer to this one is no. That should have been up right to here. The other one is, if you have a riser pipe, do not, one more time, do not wrap that pipe with a geofabric material. It will clog up unless you get the special ones that have been designed for it. They clog up. Well, we got to filter the water. No, you're removing sediment not by filtering. You're removing sediment by the fact that water is ponded and it settles out. So that's probably the big thing going there. Outlet skimmers, outlet structures, these are the most effective recommended by EPA. They float. Somebody says, how's water go up the pipe? It doesn't. That's not the point of them. They got to be installed correctly. The only bad part about this is that we have some people on this particular project that had 22s that sunk them pretty well because that's PVC pipe. The kids were about 35 years old, by the way. And the whole intent of this is that as water comes in, they lift up, they float. And they remove water within the first 3 to 6 inches below the surface. That's the cleanest spot for the water. Think about them. They're reusable. And they do work. If they get turned upside down, which we had a lot of that, this is just showing the back side of the thing or underside of it. It's a screen where water just siphons off. It is very, very simple, and they can be used from project to project without any problem. Temporary units, this was the wetlands, and the contractor wanted to come up with to remove the sediments that were coming off where they were doing constructions of the wetlands. He removed water from the top. Why? That's where the least amount of sediment is. Make sure your pond has adequate volume. Contractors, that is your obligation to make sure. If you need to get a surveyor out there, tell your client, somebody's got to survey this thing, because there's your riser pipes right there. And you need to have confirmation of it. Know your limitations in all these things. As we get toward the end on here, think about some of the other techniques that are used. One of these is a porous baffle. This is a testing facility at Auburn University. These porous baffles, which are just jute netting, they do tremendous amount of good in slowing the flow of velocity so we can get lots of deposition occurring. So you as a contractor, make sure these are always working if they're in your pond. The predominant catching of sediment, the big stuff, is up here. This is the polishing, if you want to call it. This gets rid of the small, this gets rid of the big. But that is what we could call a forebay. So the idea of this one, Auburn University had the water into here. They were testing it, how effective those porous baffles are. Are all embankments need to be stabilized against erosion? Depends. Is the structure there for 2 weeks or 2 years? If it's going to be for 2 years, stabilize those. But if it's only going to be there for 2 weeks, you probably don't need to because, well, you probably grow vegetation pretty quick here. Colorado, it takes us 2 growing seasons to get 60% coverage of our ground, which just shows you where we live on it. In summary, maintain those discharge structures. And you want to fix it so you get at least 36 hours up, maybe higher. Maintain the flood discharge structures. Maintain sufficient flow lengths, widths, and depths. And if you don't see them on the plans that are given to you, ask about them at the pre-con meetings if you go to them. Why aren't these a little bit longer? Stabilize those embankments. Maintain any internal best management practice. Those are those porous baffles that you have in there. Don't let them be destroyed. Get in there, repair them. And this is the one I just want to bring out to you. If you happen to have an effective pond, you do not necessarily always need to have a barrier in front of the inlets, but you better make sure it's an effective pond. And that's, I'm saying, to the designers, not to the contractors. So be careful on it because there are many ways that you can save yourself money. A good pond will save you money, not cost you money. That means contractors, you got to do the maintenance. With that in mind, thank you so much. And would you like to be the guy who was running that one?